Okay, so imagine you're a teenager and all you want is to live with your mom, but the problem is your dad, you know.
Hmm.
And so you make a choice, a really unthinkable choice, to poison him. That's the chilling true story we're going to talk about today. It's the case of Marie Robard.
Yeah, it really sends chills down your spine, right? And as we break this down, we'll see it's more than just a crime.
Uh,
It's really about all these relationships, the big choices we make, and how long the consequences can last.
exactly. So we need to figure out what made Marie go down this dark path. Let's start with the family. We have Marie, her mom Beth, and her stepfather Frank.
And this family, this is where things start to go bad. So Frank was really strict rules for everything.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, he's cheating on Beth. That really makes everything worse.
Oh, wow. So imagine you're a teenager, right? You're already dealing with all the stuff that comes with that, and then you find out your stepdad's doing this. It's no wonder Marie wanted to get out of there.
I agree. Completely understandable that she wanted to move out. Here's the real tough part. Her mom decides to stay with Frank.
Oh, man. Can you imagine how rejected she felt?
Right, like a double whammy.
And my man.
And this whole time, Marie just wants to be close to her mom. Talk about a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it really shows how powerful those early relationships are and how much we crave connection. So then we have Stephen Marie's dad. He comes into the picture.
Right, Stevenson. Yeah. And it seems like he was really trying to get his life back on track. He'd been fighting depression, but he's doing better, had a steady job, even started dating again.
Yeah, he sounds like he was ready for a fresh start and excited for Marie to live with him. Seems like he really wanted to build a good and loving home for her.
Right.
You can almost feel how optimistic he was, right? But here's the sad part. Even though Stephen was trying so hard, Marie was really unhappy living with him. She just couldn't get over missing her mother.
It sounds like missing her mom just took over everything in her mind and maybe even clouded her judgment. And that's what leads us to this dark turn in the story.
This is where we get to the scary part. The poison plant. Marie, wanting to go back to her mom, comes up with a plan to make her dad sick. She steals barium acetate from her high school chemistry class.
Yeah.
She figured that this would make her mom take her back.
The fact that she stole the poison is a big deal, don't you think? I mean, it makes you wonder if she planned this out beforehand. The teacher had warned the whole class about how dangerous barium acetate is, so Marie knew what it could do.
It's chilling to think about a young girl choosing something she knows is dangerous. It's really scary.
It is, and what happens next is just heartbreaking. So one night, Marie cooks dinner for her father, and she puts the poison in his food. It hits him fast, and it's bad. Stephen has these terrible stomach cramps, and he can't stop throwing up.
He even had to leave church because he felt so awful. Can you imagine how much pain he was in and how confused he must have felt?
It's tough to hear about how much he suffered. And tragically, that same night, Stephen dies. He was only 38 years old.
Oh, man, that's just awful. You know, Stephen was finally getting his life together. He was so excited to be a dad, and it's all taken away so suddenly.
Yeah, and to make this whole thing even crazier, get this, the medical examiner first thought that Stephen died of a heart attack.
A heart attack. How could they not think something was wrong? He was so young and had those awful symptoms.
I know. It just shows you how rare and unexpected something like this is. It's so out there that the medical examiner didn't even consider it.
It's unbelievable. And then there's this detail that's almost too weird to be true while Marie's out on bond for the murder. She gets a job as a waitress at TGI Fridays. Can you believe that?
No, that does make you stop and think, right? Serving food while she's waiting for trial for poisoning someone. What do you make of that? Was she trying to act normal? Was she in denial? Or is there something else going on?
It's just bizarre what must have been going through her mind. So all this is going on, and her best friend Stacy, she knows what Marie did. She's carrying his awful secret.
That must have weighed on her so much, especially for a teenager. Imagine the guilt and fear she must have felt. No wonder she had a hard time dealing with it.
She really did. She was having nightmares, her grades were dropping, she even started drinking to try and forget. It just shows you how damaging it can be to keep something like that bottled up inside.
It really does show the impact of that kind of trauma. Keeping it all inside can have terrible consequences. But Stacy didn't say anything for months. She had promised Marie she wouldn't tell.
That's some serious loyalty. But eventually, it all became too much.
Yeah, after 8 long months, she finally breaks down. Stacy tells her school counselor everything.
And thank goodness she did, because that's when the investigation really starts to move forward. The counselor knew how serious this was and called the police right away.
It's like something had to happen. The medical examiner was still unsure about Stephen's death and agreed to test the rest of the blood and tissue samples for barium acetate.
That was lucky. Those samples were almost thrown away.
If they had been gone, it would have been nearly impossible to prove that Marie did it. That was a close one.
Makes you realize how easily this whole case could have been forgotten. But it seems like it was meant to be discovered.
And when they got the results back, they were shocking. Stephen had 250 times the amount of barium acetate needed to kill someone in his system.
250 times. That's not just trying to make someone sick, that's clearly trying to kill them.
Absolutely. That finding changed everything. It proved without a doubt that Stephen's death was no accident.
It was all over for Marie. And that's when they arrested her. Right there on the UT Austin campus where she was studying to be a medical pathologist.
Yeah.
How ironic is that?
The irony is unbelievable, right?
Right.
She wanted to work with dead bodies, and she's being charged with causing a death. It is a whole other layer to her story, wouldn't you say?
It's like she was drawn to the very thing she was trying to get away from. And now the big question is, did Marie plan to kill her father, or was this a horrible accident that happened because she was desperate?
That's the question that's at the heart of the trial, and the answer, well, it's not so simple. The trial was really intense. The prosecution and the defense, they had completely different ideas about what happened, and they were fighting it out in court.
It must have been like watching two totally different stories at the same time. The prosecution wanted Marie to be found guilty. They were saying she was this cold and calculated killer, and the defense was trying to make her seem like a real person, a troubled teenager who did something terrible because she felt like she had no other choice.
Exactly. And the prosecution, they had a lot of evidence, but they also knew that Marie's age and the whole unusual situation could make the jury feel sorry for her.
So it sounds like they had to be really careful. They had to prove she was guilty, but also show that they understood it was complicated.
Yeah, they did. And they had two main strategies. First, they focused on the hard evidence, like the poison, the fact that it was a lethal dose, and that Marie had stolen it from school. They said all of that meant she planned it out. It was intentional.
Yeah, the facts are hard to ignore, especially with scientific evidence like that. It makes you wonder how the defense could even argue against such a strong case.
Right. Well, they had to find a way to make the jury see Marie as a young woman who made a mistake, not as some criminal mastermind. They focused on her emotional state. They said she was really upset and desperate to be with her mom, and that she didn't fully understand how deadly her actions could be.
So they were basically saying, yeah, she did it, but look at everything she was going through. They were hoping the jury would have some empathy for her.
Exactly. They wanted the jury to see Marie as a victim of her circumstances, a young woman who made a bad choice because she was so vulnerable. They said she wasn't some cold-blooded killer, just a scared teenager who went too far.
But didn't the prosecution have a good argument against that? They brought up her dream of becoming a medical examiner and said that showed she was obsessed with death.
Right. They implied that her interest in the body and how it works was more than just scientific curiosity. They tried to make her seem like someone fascinated by the dark side of life, someone who might be drawn to causing death.
That's a creepy thought. And then there was that missing page from the emergency handbook in her chemistry class, the one that explained what barium acetate poisoning does. That's pretty incriminating, isn't it?
It is. And the prosecution used that missing page to say that Marie knew what she was doing.
Yeah.
They said it showed she planned this out and was aware of what would happen, which goes against what the defense was saying about it being a spur-of-the-moment thing.
It's hard to argue with that. If she was researching the effects of the poison, it does seem like she planned it.
The defense tried to say that the teacher never actually gave that warning about barium acetate, but that didn't work. It made it look like Marie had to find that information herself, which actually helped the prosecution's case.
Wow. So trying to discredit the evidence actually made their case weaker. It's like they were making things worse for themselves.
They were definitely in a tough spot. The prosecution also brought up Marie's good grades in science to show that she was smart and definitely knew what she was doing.
So they were saying, don't be fooled by her age. She's intelligent and knew exactly what would happen.
Exactly. And they emphasized that by playing a part of Marie's confession where she admitted that her chemistry teacher had warned the class about barium acetate being dangerous.
So she couldn't say she didn't know what would happen. She knew it was dangerous, but she still did it.
It definitely made her seem like someone willing to take a risk, a calculated risk to get back to her mother. But even with all the evidence against her, Marie kept saying she was innocent throughout the whole trial.
So she testified and spoke for herself. That must have been a dramatic moment.
It was. During her testimony, Marie stuck to her story. She said she never wanted to kill her dad. She just wanted him to be sick enough for her mom to take her back. She said she was just a scared and confused teenager who made a horrible decision because she desperately wanted to be with her mother.
I bet it was really hard for her to talk about that night and everything that led to her father's death.
It must have been emotional. But the prosecution didn't go easy on her. They questioned everything she said and kept bringing up the amount of poison she used, 250 times the lethal dose, remember? They argued that it wasn't just about making him sick, it was clearly meant to kill him.
It's a tough argument to fight. It makes you wonder if the jury actually believed she felt bad, or if they thought she was just trying to get away with murder.
That was the big question throughout the whole trial. Did they buy her story or did they see through her? Would they agree with the prosecution and say she was a cold-blooded killer, or would they side with the defense and say she was just a desperate teenager? After weeks of people talking in court, tons of evidence and emotional arguments from both sides, the jury had to make a decision.
This is it, the moment of truth. It all comes down to what the jury decides. What was the feeling in the courtroom like while everyone waited for the verdict?
You could feel the tension. It was thick. Everyone knew that Marie's future was on the line. The jury talked it over for less than an hour before they came back with their decision.
Less than an hour. Wow, that's really fast. Seems like they were all pretty much in agreement.
It does. And when they announced the verdict, it was clear the prosecution won guilty.
Guilty. So after all the arguing, the emotional testimonies, and the different sides of the story, the jury decided that Marie Robard was responsible for her father's death.
That's right. And with that verdict, the focus shifted to what her sentence would be. What would be the price for such a horrible and unthinkable act?
Wow. Guilty.
Yeah.
It's hard to even imagine what was going through Marie's head at that moment. Her whole life, her future, it was all uncertain.
Yeah, it's like everything comes crashing down, right? She has to face what she did and the consequences. And of course, there's Stephen's life that was lost. There's no getting away from that.
It really makes you think about how our actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences are permanent and absolutely devastating.
The sentencing was just as emotional as the trial itself. The prosecution, they wanted her to get a really tough sentence.
Wow.
He said that she planned this whole thing out and that she was dangerous.
And they really didn't hold back, right? I remember reading about their final statement. It was chilling. They said, if she gets probation, she could be the one serving you your next meal.
That's a scary thought. It shows you how much fear and anxiety this case caused. It makes you think about all the everyday interactions we have, the people we trust to make our food, and how danger can be hiding right there in plain sight.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we never really know what's going on in someone else's mind. But even though they wanted a harsh sentence, the judge gave Marie 28 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years.
That's a long time, but it's not the maximum 99 years she could have gotten. It seems like the judge considered how complicated the case was.
Right.
The jury said she was guilty, but maybe the judge also thought about her age and the chance that she could change.
It's a decision that probably caused a lot of debate. Some people probably thought she deserved more time, while others might have said she should get a break because of her age and all the emotional stress she was dealing with.
It's a tough balance to find, isn't it? Justice for the victim, accountability for the person who committed the crime, and the chance for them to become a better person.
This case really makes you think about the big questions we have about our justice system. What's the point of punishment? Is it revenge? Is it to stop others from doing the same thing? Or is it to help people change?
And how do we balance all of that with how complicated people are, the effects of trauma, and the possibility that someone can actually turn their life around? Marie's case is like a small example of these bigger conversations we have as a society.
It's amazing, right, how this one case can bring up so many questions about guilt, the impact of family problems, and the choices we make when we feel trapped.
It's a story that stays with you. It makes you think about the balance between who we are and how we were raised, the long-term effects of our choices, and whether people can really redeem themselves.
And it's not just about Marie, is it? Her case seemed to be part of a bigger trend back then. A lot more cases of kids killing their parents, especially in the 90s.
You're right. Marie's story got a lot of attention, partly because it happened at the same time as this increase in kids killing their parents. It made people talk about family problems, the pressure on teenagers, and the potential for violence, even in homes that seem totally normal.
It's both fascinating and terrifying. What would make someone, especially a child, kill their own parent? What kind of situations usually lead to these awful crimes?
Well, experts say that kids usually kill their parents in extreme situations. It's often connected to abuse or neglect that goes on for a long time. The person who commits the crime, they feel desperate and think that killing is the only way out.
But that doesn't really fit with Marie's case, does it? It doesn't sound like her father abused or neglected her. He was really trying to be a good and loving dad.
You're right. And that's what makes Marie's case so confusing. It's different from the usual cases of kids killing their parents. Some experts have said that she represents how damaging divorce can be for children, that she was just a desperate teenager caught in the middle of a broken family.
It's like she was lost and overwhelmed with all these feelings, wanting her mom's love and not knowing how to deal with all the changes in her life. It's heartbreaking.
There was also an idea that one journalist had. They said that maybe Marie did it because she wanted her mom's attention and love back. She felt like her stepfather was a threat.
That's a disturbing thought, but it could explain why she did it. It suggests that her crime was really a messed up attempt to get back the special place she thought she had with her mom.
It raises important questions about how families work the need for good communication and understanding, and how broken relationships can have consequences we don't expect. We might never know for sure what was going on in Marie's mind, but her story reminds us how complex people are and how fragile family relationships can be.
Yeah, and it also shows us how important it is to ask for help when we're struggling, instead of doing something desperate that could have terrible consequences.
Definitely. We need to create a world where we care about mental health just as much as physical health, where people feel like they can get help without being judged or ashamed.
Recognizing the signs early in ourselves and others, and knowing where to go for help, that can make a huge difference.
And as we think about Marie's story, it's important to remember that even though what she did was horrible, she did say she was sorry. And while she was in prison, she was apparently a good inmate. She followed the rules, volunteered for jobs, and seemed to really regret killing her father.
Of course, we can't know for sure if she was truly sorry or if she was just trying to get out of prison sooner. But after 7 years, Marie was released on parole and basically disappeared. She changed her name and tried to start a new life where no one knew who she was.
It seems like she really wanted to put the past behind her, and there's no record of her ever committing another crime. It shows you that people can change and maybe even find redemption even after doing something terrible.
It's a hopeful thought in the middle of this tragic story. It reminds us that people can grow and become better even after making huge mistakes.
Maybe that's the biggest thing we can take away from Marie Robart's story. It makes us think about what it means to be human, the complicated relationships we have in families, and the choices we make when things are tough. It makes us face some uncomfortable truths about ourselves, our society, and the potential for both good and bad that we all have. And if you found this deep dive thought-provoking, we invite you to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more stories and analysis. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the human experience.